Okay, so a little bit about me, since I'm up here and you probably have no idea who I am. I first started professionally in the application security industry, working on Web Inspect when it was a small company by Spy Dynamics. It was about 20 people when I joined the Spy Labs department. Got to write cool attack engines and learn all about that stuff. I used to do a lot of research. It's been a few years. I probably need to pick that up. One way or another, I've been in the industry since the 90s. I started the first application security news site in 2000, CGI Security, a couple years before OWASP, which I've also contributed towards. And as I mentioned in the intro, I'm currently working at Box, managing the application security program and the App Store security program. So this particular talk, I'm going to lay it out by here is a problem category. Here's a bunch of problems within it. Then I'm going to share real-world stories associated with those problems, and then I'm going to tell you what some of the solutions are that I've seen work. So the first section is security engagement, specifically how other teams engage the security department or don't engage them. So one of the biggest problems is that we just don't get engaged. People are making new products. There's not necessarily a hook to notify security. And actually, before I even go forward here, these are not problems that I'm stating are at my current employer. These have happened throughout my career, and I'm not going to say what companies these did impact. And some of these may have impacted multiple companies, which I will mention in the slides. I just wanted to get that disclaimer out there. So there's times where maybe the marketing team decides, hey, we're going to register a new domain and we're going to host it on GoDaddy or something else, and then they'll just deploy it, and then we'll find out about it 6 months later. That happens. Or they're like, hey, next Tuesday we want to release something. We know it's Thursday at 4 p.m., but can you do a pen test and get all the issues fixed? That'd be awesome. That's happened probably about 20 times to me at different companies. Sometimes they just email the security at company name black hole, and then maybe it gets to you, maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's flagged as spam. It's very important to communicate when people need to reach out to you and when. So here's the first real-world story that I'm going to tell. So I was at a company, and they created a new product. And I found out about it by accident because I like to search for my company in Google News just to see how they're doing. And they said, yep, we had this brand new desktop product, and that company was not really known for desktop products, and it was live. And that's how the security team became notified of this product. So I immediately reached out to the team. And of course, it had a lot of bad vulns when we started to do testing of it. Luckily, it was announced, but nobody was using it. It was definitely a good learning experience. And we immediately pushed out the new fixes, and that's when I died a little bit on the inside that day. I was really kind of optimistic about the industry and all this stuff, and that's kind of one of my real first doses of reality. But because this happened, we were able to use it as an example to get some changes made so that when new products were coming out, we would have a mechanism that would notify us early enough in the process to get engaged. So this is some of you have probably had to deal with this exact thing, which is how do you solve other teams engaging you? Other teams may want to use new third-party components in their software. They may want to use things on their desktop. This is primarily an application security talk, but the engagement problem is basically for all of security. They may want to utilize a third-party vendor and share data with them. And again, sometimes these things just happen. Sometimes legal compliance don't get looped in either. So one of the things you'll want to do is think about and explore what are the processes for when new vendors are onboarded. Is there even a process? If there isn't, talk to some people. Pretty much every mature company will have some kind of process where we want to do business with company X. What are the legal compliance and security obligations that we have to meet? So don't be afraid to talk to other stakeholders and other departments and try to figure out how you can hook into their process, because ultimately it's their process, it's not yours. And if they haven't a clue on how to do this, help them to build it. I've had this work a few different times. Create different email DLs for particular purposes. So vendor, or at least have different subject lines or maybe different ticket types for different purposes. For example, when a product manager is creating a new product, working on the high-level design, they will need a certain level of, they'll need a security architect probably to help out. That's probably not going to be the NetSec guy, it's not going to be the firewall, it's probably going to be somebody on the AppSec side, or maybe on the NetSec architecture side and AppSec architecture side. And ideally, if you can, and this has worked for me, create different ticketing types. Create maybe a Confluence page or something internally that's like, hey, here's where you click on this, it'll fill out a ticket, it will notify us, we will get back to you within, 24 to 72 hours. We will then follow this process. I know people are pretty anti-process, but as you work at larger companies, process helps to find out about things and have a more consistent way of looking into lots of things. Small companies, you can just kind of talk back and forth. Once you break a few thousand employees and then you're getting up to 10,000 employees, like you need something, you want to be able to record how often are we engaged, what are the resources being spent for pen tests or design reviews or architecture. Not only does that let you know if you're doing a good job supporting the business, but it lets you know if you may need to hire more people to support it, or if it's actually making a difference. You ultimately will build metrics around this. So some of the meta problems, I've had to hook into different dev processes at different companies, and you're as an AppSec person, you're basically at the mercy of the consistency of the development process and what those processes are. I've been at companies where different groups do their own thing. I've been at other companies where everybody does exactly the same thing. And trying to find a way to become notified of projects early. If there's not a consistent process or even a process you're even aware of, then how are you going to get hooked in? You're not going to email up people and just hope it happens, because people are going to forget like a week later. Ideally, getting hooks into the dev process is part of dev's process, not your process, and having dev enforce that is a very good approach I found for getting notified, and that's basically what I've implemented at multiple companies is getting hooked in during the design phase with the product manager, with the dev managers and the devs as part of the ARC review. And then later on, there's other things that happen like maybe pen testing or static dynamic analysis, things like that. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to whoever the owner is of the dev process. Maybe they don't have one. I remember at one of the larger companies I was at, I got to meet, I was an IC, and I got to meet with like all the directors and some of the dev managers. It was very intimidating. And I would just start asking questions like, are there SLAs when bugs need to be fixed? And the answer was no. And is there, just finding out very basic things like that. And I don't mean security SLAs, I just mean SLAs. There might be a lot more, and I'm not saying SLA is a massive gap necessarily, but it is. But there may be other things that are not occurring that basically could hinder your ability to become notified of things. So security training is an area that I'm very opinionated on. Some people might disagree with me. A lot of companies that I've been to either don't have a developer-specific security training program, or they're teaching pen testing to dev. They're basically like, okay, here's how I hack some stuff. Here's me using burp proxy, XSSing something. They're not necessarily telling them how to fix it. They also failed to communicate where to go for help. And this is something that, and a lot of this talk that I'm going to be giving is not very technical, but these are the things I'm discussing ultimately can result in bugs appearing or bugs not getting resolved that are not on a technical level, but more on a human and a process level. So just wanted to set that as well. So letting developers know I need help fixing a security issue. Who can I talk to? I need help figuring out what internal library is appropriate to do crypto. I need help designing things. Having this in every single developer security training deck, no matter what the level is, just keep repeating it. People do, even if they don't remember the content, they'll at least remember that the deck has information on where to go, and they'll know where to go to look that up. So that's probably one of the big takeaways that I will say. So at a few different companies I've been at, I mentioned a little bit, they basically just teach how to do burp proxy and attack your applications using the OWASP 10. And they don't necessarily tell developers, here's the internal library to use to mitigate this vulnerability. Here's how the data access layer works to possibly prevent SQL injection. When I spoke to developers who received this kind of training, they were confused. They're like, okay, like maybe a certain percentage of them think it's cool because like security's fun and they want to learn more. But a lot of them are just like, look, I'm just doing my job. Security is of course important, but like, how do I do my job? You're teaching me how to hack stuff. That's not my job. Like, it's okay if you show me some hacks, but like, give me the advice to prevent this from being introduced, or library, like example, using certain libraries internally, or where to go for help to prevent these problems. So again, pen testers are not developers, and I usually when I first see the first training deck at a company, usually it starts off as all attack, and then as it goes through multiple iterations, it gets more focused on the dev side, like, okay, here's a category on logging. Here are logging risks. Here's how to mask PII so it doesn't get logged according to whatever the compliance or legal requirements are. But a lot of the time, it just starts off just attacking stuff and maybe like one example of how to fix XSS, and that's it. So one of the most beneficial things, and a lot of people are starting to do this, is whenever possible, reference real company bugs, show the JIRA ID, show the code before and after, explain that you're not picking fun at them, just explain, here's a vulnerability type, and it's happened to us, and here's how long it took to fix, and try to reference those types of attacks to real-world hacks. Let people know that there are consequences for some of these things. So like on XSS, you can reference, the Sammy worm or something like that. That's a real outcome of not fixing XSS. And if possible, and I've built out 3 different programs from scratch at 3 different companies. I found that, especially at the larger companies, the front end and the back end deal with different types of code. The back end, sure, they want to know about XSS, but did they want to spend half an hour learning about it? No. Are they going to want to understand how to deal with XML messages being passed back and forth, or XML-specific injection risks? Yes. Is front end going to care about that if they don't actually deal with XML? Not as much. Whenever possible, find out basically what are the areas of focus on both teams, and try to tailor as much as you can the risks to those teams. Try to encourage them to go to both. But at the very least, if you're a back-end person, understand all of the back-end risks and the generalized risks, but don't necessarily deep dive on stuff that doesn't apply to them, especially if it's going to be multiple hours. So inventory, this one always seems to bite everybody. You go to a company and getting a simple answer like, what is our external IP space? Where's a list of our host names or marketing host names? If you don't know what they are, then how do you know you're going to be security testing them? How do you know they're getting scanned? How do you know people are even patching them? Like, you need to know what you're aware of in order to protect it. One situation that happened was I was in charge of a scanner. I kind of took the scanner over, and it had been scanning a bunch of Class Cs that apparently somebody in China owned for like 3 or 4 years, and nobody noticed. And that was because we didn't have a great IP inventory, and it wasn't being given the love that it needed. Luckily, nobody in China complained, but it was kind of a, okay, what else are we missing? And I needed to, so I reached out to the networking team and I asked them for the inventory. And they gave me some stuff and then some other things I found. And then I resulted to using Aaron. Then I started finding all kinds of stuff. And that was really depressing. I was really hoping the network team could just pull some configs or something and give it to me, but like it wasn't easily obtainable. So as an action item of this, we worked with them to get an inventory of the IP so that we can ensure our scanners are up to date, ensure that we understand what is the surface of our area. We also worked, actually I'll go on to that one in a bit. So again, find out who's the owner for IP space and keeping the inventory. Work with ops. So this is a trick that I did, was I worked with ops to become notified of new DNS entries. Basically, anytime the zone files changed, it emailed us. And we would find out about new projects a couple of months in advance because they would start creating domain names for it. And so that's been beneficial to me. And especially marketing. Marketing is a lot of the time the guilty party, because they will just register domains like crazy, one-time events. And being able to reach out to somebody in marketing who can kind of keep an updated list or notify you when new surface appears, that's very important. Oop. So, scanning. Again, you may not be scanning everything. Not just at the network and the host level, but it's possible if you're running a dynamic application scanner, you may not be hitting all of the paths. Or if you're doing static analysis, maybe you're not hitting all the repos. This is pretty much everywhere that I've gone, this is the case. When you are doing authenticated scans, often they will be set up, they will work, then the account will go away, nobody notices. The scans are running and people think it's great, but sometimes the accounts get locked out, rate limited. Sometimes captchas might get thrown up on the web layer, or somebody deleted the account by accident. I've seen that happen. So hitting rate limiters and account lockouts are very, very common, especially on the web layer of scanning. So this is one of the stories I like to tell. I wanted to run. I just wanted to Unmap a Class C in prod. I was kind of curious about it, and I caused an outage. And it was actually I think it was like $180,000 firewalls because there's like pairs of them. So they got knocked down. And this is just me on could have been a BlackBerry scanning. It's a little device. So I got yelled at, and the NetSec team, or I should say the networking team, they yelled at me for it. And I was obviously not in a good mood that I caused an outage, because that's not cool. But rather than basically try to work with me to figure out how could we make this problem not happen, they just decided to bark at me a whole bunch. And when they gave peer review feedback for reviews, they wrote negative feedback about me. They said, he should have known not to run an Unmap against a Class C in prod. So me and my boss laughed our asses off on that feedback. Basically, they were running the firewalls at like 99.999% packet per second, and that one little Unmap scan hit that packet per second threshold. And we ended up speaking to some people and getting this fixed. But this is just an example of something innocent, like I'm just gonna do Unmap Class C, nothing special. Default flags, can have a bad consequence. Another time, I was doing a security assessment from home, and this was a customer I really didn't want to fuck with. So I was really paranoid that if I hit pause, that there might be some background threads keep on going. So I literally unplugged my Ethernet cable. I was that paranoid. And at 6 a.m. I got a phone call saying, "Oh my God, you need to stop scanning them. You're causing an outage." And I said to my boss, well, that's not possible. I'm looking at the Ethernet cable. It's on the floor. And after some investigation, the scanner had generated 20,000 plus emails, and it was still cycling through the queue the next day. So another example of try to become aware of what it is that you're scanning before you scan it. Sometimes the people you're scanning don't even know, but these are just real world things that have happened to me personally. So first thing is first, make sure you have a good, I've said it before, make sure you have a good inventory, make sure you're scanning the right stuff that you legally own, and make sure that you're aware of new repos that are being added. Work with the dev people. Find out if there's multiple repos. Some teams might have their own. Some of them might use GitHub. Some of them might use Git internally. And create dedicated accounts for scanning. And get some kind of notification where if they're getting locked out, you can become aware of that. If possible, if there's a prod machine that you can take out of the rotation that exactly mimics things and you're doing a web app layer scan, see if you can take off rate limiting for that one particular account if you have that capability, or at least disable locking out of it. Make sure that when you're scanning, especially at the web app layer, capture the traffic, look at the responses, watch when it gets logged out, see if it ever tries to log back in. A lot of the time when these things get set up, they work or they're set up wrong. One of the biggest problems you'll have, and I've worked on, I worked professionally on web security scanners for 4 years. So I know how to use them really well for at least 10 years now. But one of the biggest problems is it understanding when to log back in. That is usually one of the biggest problems that you'll have. And one pro tip there is if it supports multiple threads, each kind of doing their own thing, one of the more accurate ways that you can run a scan, which is slower, is just do one request at a time. You'll have less lockout issues. It will be slower. There are some products that support multiple concurrent sessions where multiple threads will be logging in and getting their own session ID, but sometimes the site may not support that. So these are things you have to explore. And notify whoever's monitoring your IDS logs what your IPs are, so you don't scare the crap out of somebody when your scanner kicks off at 9 p.m. on a Sunday or something like that. Yeah. Let's go see how I'm doing on time here. Okay. So external researchers. I've personally been in every single combination of this scenario. I have responsibly disclosed. I have disclosed, which nowadays wouldn't be considered responsible. Back then, it was cool. I've been on the receiving side of irresponsible disclosure and responsible disclosure. So this is an area that I am pretty comfortable talking about. They will submit garbage reports. Like, you have the trace track method enabled. This is a high critical vulnerability. Give me $1,000, I will tell the New York Times. Like, yeah, you should disable that HTTP verb, but it's only useful if cross-site scripting's on the site. So it's not a high or critical. And for that particular issue, I remember actually back in the day working with Jeremiah Grossman on that particular one, his XST paper, on that particular issue, but they will just jack things up to try to make themselves look important, or they'll submit things that are wrong. One person submitted a report. They said, if I configure my browser to use a proxy and I submit my credit card to you, I can steal the credit card. Where's my bug bounty? I've actually had that. Some people will blackmail you. They will say, you need to buy my services or I'm going to disclose this. And I'm not going to tell you how many times this has happened or where this has happened, but it happens. They will report duplicate issues. Some people may report the same issue within a week, and then it's like, okay, who gets credit? I've even seen people literally submit the same blob of text to their friend sends it from another email a week later, and they both try to get the bounty. A lot of the time, they'll just tell you, and then they'll tell the media right away. And hopefully this doesn't offend anybody, but if you're a bug bounty vendor, please don't ask me questions. Yeah. So one of the first examples is I was told about an issue the same day that the media was told about the issue. And I think I found out at 11 a.m. and by 1 a.m. we had it fixed and pushed. That really sucked. And that actually that was well within when responsible disclosure was considered like acceptable. Another example, which I thought, I kind of still scratch my head on this, is somebody was trying to form a business relationship and reached out to the biz dev department and wanting to work with us. And they found a vulnerability in our product and then they decided to just dump it in the news. They didn't give us any time to fix it, but they're like trying to form a business relationship. So this has happened more than once, and needless to say, they all got shit canned when they did this, because that's not a good way when you want to have a partnership with a business, is basically to shit on their face like the first day that you're talking to them. So external researchers, it's very important that you have the rules of engagement on your site, whether you have a bug bounty or not. You need to say what is okay, what is not okay, specifically around the testing. And if you have a bounty, obviously link to it and provide PGP keys. People do use them. Some sites I've been to, it's hard to find it, but it is there somewhere, but try to have it in like a fairly visible place. A lot of researchers are actually trying to respect the confidentiality of the issues. So, Vuln Management. This is basically the only animated GIF from Eastbound and Down I could present without probably getting arrested. So, yeah, the show's awesome. So, vuln remediation. Often people will do pen tests. They're not necessarily tracked in a bug tracker. It's more of a conversation that you have with the dev manager. Hey, can you fix this issue? And you lose insight into when it gets fixed. You only have verbally that it's being fixed, but or maybe you don't, depending on the state of your program when you're entering into the company. Because they're not on the bug tracker, it's hard to kind of keep tabs on them and kind of see what's happening with them. Is there any movement on them? Have they started the development? Are they testing it? People will often not remediate issues, and there's lots of reasons for that. Many of them are legitimate. I'm getting my 5-minute warning. So issues may mysteriously get closed, or they may be assigned to old employees, and this is often why this does not happen. So just to talk faster, one issue I had was one of my critical issues was downgraded, and I had an alert set up to tell me this. And the developer wrote, lowering the priority to majors so we don't miss some crazy SLA for critical tickets. So the developer made the decision to lower the security risk because they didn't want to get yelled at. I've seen this multiple companies, and you need to assume that this is going to occur, and you need to set up monitoring. I've seen somebody assign an issue to an unassigned person. Apparently in Jira, there's actually a person called unassigned, and you can assign things to them, which nobody was aware of, but I caught it in one of those alerts. So, yep, sending up lots of alerts on tickets that are security flagged in nature. It can give you lots of insight into the closure, the life cycle of the issue, the type of issue that it is. This one, I want to say, hopefully I at least get through this before we end. Budgeting once got in the way of fixing an issue. We performed a pen test for PCI or something like that. The issues were discovered. Dev pushed back saying that all the dev time was allocated for the year and they wanted us to pay them money to fix the issue. And I was like, what did you say? And basically the planning process booked out every hour for the entire year in advance. And they didn't have any pools of dev time left over to fix the issue. So that was an interesting learning experience where the process, the dev process, hinders the ability to get security issues fixed. And again, you'll often see issues closed by accident. People will close them because they don't feel like fixing it. These are all things that happened. So add security flags to all of your security defects. Add automated alerts against everything with a security flag. Set up daily alerting when issues are closed, updated, or reassigned. And I wrote an article a long time ago on QASEC.com. There's a bunch of stuff I think people in this room would like on tips for tracking security-related defects in your bug tracker. And I basically discuss everything in detail that I just covered in like 2 minutes. So prioritization of vulnerabilities. Who has the right to determine this? Are you just making up the priority as you go along? If I ask somebody else in the security department, will they give you a different answer? One of the real world examples that happened was I filed a P1 blocker issue that was XSS. They talked to another team within the security organization. They said, that's a P2, whatever. And then it took 3 times longer to fix. And that was before I had good monitoring set up. And that was a problem because people within the security org didn't even come to the same conclusion about how important something was. So the solution for this was create a vulnerability bug bar. I've actually built out these at 3 different companies. I base it on the WASC threat classification. I have a default stance for most of the attack and weakness categories. 80% of the time, this eliminates the need for debate. It's a starting point. You can lower the priority of things, but you really shouldn't be upgrading the priority. And if you need to upgrade it, security needs to be notified and there needs to be a discussion around it. So patching, really quick. People often won't patch, and they may not be able to handle emergency patches. And when they actually do, a bunch of stuff breaks. This basically shows that a company does not do patching very frequently. So one time I was at a company and they hadn't performed patching for over a year in ops, and once we decided to apply patches, it caused outages. And then people were like, oh, we don't like applying patches because it breaks stuff. So you need to establish relationships with ops and IT to learn about the patching process. Ensure they have an emergency release vehicle available. That's the most important thing, because issues will just come up one day, and you want to make sure that you can handle it. So let me skip through pushy vendors. I think when the slides are published, a few of you might chuckle. The last thing I'll talk about is compliance, which is they may not be aware of when the pen tests need to occur. Like when you join the company, you may not know when it needs to occur. Compliance may hit you with unreasonable expectations for doing I'm out of time. All right, so any questions? Yeah, so actually M&A is something that typically is handled fairly well, at least in some of the companies that I've been in. Usually legal and compliance is always looped in. And usually when one of them is looped in, they like to loop us in. So having a good relationship with legal and compliance can help with that. And typically with M&As, you're not filing tickets that a lot of people are seeing because it's very confidential. So it's typically something that you don't want to assign to a ticket queue. You want to talk to a senior person on the team.
So you mentioned using bug tracking and things for the issues that you find. How do you deal with scale on that? So you got hundreds of applications with thousands of vulnerabilities being processing through there. How do you actually get things resolved without killing your developers with a bunch of tickets?
Sure. So knowing what the quantity of tickets to file are is important, especially on the ops side. You're not going to file 1,000 quals results. You're probably going to file 20 patches that equate to 1,000 quals results. On the dev side, on the other hand, typically you're typically filing 1 defect per vulnerability. And when you're filing that, adding the security flag to it so you can query against it, learn when it's getting fixed, learn when it's getting triaged. And that is one of your best places for figuring out metrics. Why is this team missing SLAs versus that team? Maybe they need some assistance. But I found it worked pretty well. I mean, I've had thousands of security flag tickets over multiple years, and I could basically query at any given time. I've also added fields, security source, where did the vulnerability come from? Did it come from a black box scanning tool? Did it come from static analysis? Internal dev, external researcher, bug bounty, whatever. So you can kind of get insight into where the bug's coming from. You might be able to do a little bit of analysis on how useful some of the tooling or some of the testing that you're doing is happening as well. And typically you'll automatically file these into a queue item in the bug tracker, and then once you've verified it's real, then you will create a ticket to the real team and link it. But you don't want to just blindly file security issues from a tool to a team because they will hate you and you will be ignored. So I think one of the things you're going to want to learn is what are the tech stacks that you're working with, and try to talk with the developers and find out what are some things you'd like to learn about. Find out about the risks of those particular tech stacks. Find out if there's any hardening or configuration stuff that can occur, or app level configs that can occur that can change the behavior. Try to teach that particular web stack. Teach web threats. It's okay to do a demo of cross-site scripting or something like that, but also provide them with here's how you prevent it, or the framework automatically prevents it for you. It's very important to let them understand how to fix it. And it's okay if people just start off with their initial attack deck, but like that's a first gen. Ultimately, devs need to know how to fix stuff. Any other questions? So I work at Box. Again, we're totally hiring, and here's my info. If anybody has any questions, I'll be over here. Thanks.